Hi guys, in this video we will go over some steps on how to do the extension assignment real domains. Okay, so in part one of the assignment, the first five problems, you're given algebraic expressions and you're asked to find the domain. In other words, you're asked to find the x values that work, that you can substitute into the algebraic expression. So let's do the first one together. This is what you're given on the first one. And if we think about it, most numbers we could probably plug in for x, and we would get some number out of this expression, right? But are there any numbers that we can't plug in? Well, what would happen if we plugged in a -3 right here? If we plugged in a -3, -3 plus 3, this whole thing would be 0, and 0 times anything is always 0, right? So we would have some number, doesn't matter what it is, divided by 0. What's wrong with that? Well, you can never divide by 0. It's against the rules in math. And so therefore, that particular x value that gave us a 0 on the bottom, namely x equals -3, can't be in our domain. Are there any numbers that we can't plug into this? I don't think there are. If you were to try like 1, 2, 1,000, -1,000, pi, whatever, they would all work. -3 is the only one that doesn't work. So how would you write that as a domain? Well, the same way we've been writing all of our other domains. We would say that x can be anything from -infinity to +infinity, but excluding -3. So -infinity is less than x is less than +infinity, and then with the added caveat that x cannot be equal to 3. Okay? So that's what I got on number 1. Number 2 is where it starts getting really interesting, because now you have a square root. So we have to ask ourselves the question, what kinds of numbers can we not square root? And hopefully you know by now that you can't square root a negative number in the real number system. Okay? Under some circumstances you can square root a real number, but we have to introduce another number system and it gets really complicated. And we'll actually look at that later on this year, I think. But just know, if we're working with real numbers, as the assignment says, real domains, we cannot square root a negative number. So if we look at the square root of x squared minus 16, what value of x would make this negative? Well, if we plug in a 4 for x, what do we get? We get 4 squared, which is 16, minus 16, which is 0. The square root of 0 is 0. So 4 works. But what happens if we plug in anything less than 4? What happens if we plug in 3, for instance? Well, we would get 3 squared, which is 9, minus 16. 9 minus 16 is -7. That doesn't work. Can't do it. So we know that we know that x equals 3 doesn't work. Okay. 2 wouldn't work either. 1 wouldn't work, because they would all give you negative numbers. 0 wouldn't work. -1 wouldn't work. -2 wouldn't work. -3 wouldn't work, because -3 quantity squared would give you a +9, because whenever you square something, it becomes positive. Minus 16, the square root of that would be something we couldn't do. But what about -4? Okay? Does -4 work? Well, it does, because -4 quantity squared is 16, okay, positive 16. Positive 16 minus 16 is 0. The square root of 0 is just 0. So -4 works, okay? Would -5 work? Well, what's -5 squared? -5 squared is 25. 25 minus 16 is 9, the square root of 9. We can do that, no problem. Okay. So what are the troublesome numbers in number 2? Well, I think it's everything between positive 4 and negative 4. Okay? So how would we write that into a domain? Well, if we're excluding everything between positive 4 and negative 4, that means x can be greater. Let me think about this. So x can be less than or equal to negative 4, right? Because it can be negative 5, it can be negative 6, it can be negative 4. But x has to be greater than or equal to 4. So this would be a completely legitimate domain on number 2, because x has to be greater than or equal to 4, because it can be 5, it can be 6, it can be 7. It can't be 3, it can't be 2, it can't be 1. And x has to be less than or equal to negative 4. It can be negative 5, it can be negative 6, so on and so forth. So that's real domains, okay? Part 2 is where you're actually creating your own equations that match up with the domain given. Do the best you can, and we'll see you guys in class. Thank you.